Recently, I've been going through iconic directors' filmographies, cleaning up my watch list, and finally watching some of those movies I know I need to see but just haven't gotten to yet. And for my first dive, I chose Stanley Kubrick, and I am so glad I did. It's almost impossible not to see the influence that his films have had on some of my favorite modern filmmakers. So, in order to talk about all of Kubrick's films, I've neatly compiled them in order from worst to best according to my own personal tastes, starting with the not so great, number 13, Fear and Desire. I feel kind of bad ranking this one at all since Kubrick himself tried to destroy every copy, but I'm a perfectionist and Kubrick can understand that. It's definitely lacking a lot of nuance and depth that come with his later films. You can feel all the emotion that Kubrick is trying to squeeze out of his material, but nothing really ever adds up to the level of quality that he probably envisioned. Number 12, Killer's Kiss. This is Kubrick's second film. This one lacked basically any script and attempted to coast off of what I deemed the cool guys in suits era, where the film itself doesn't really have a lot of substance, and it's instead relying on just shots of a man, probably smoking, looking to get with a woman, yeah. This film may actually be more boring than Fear and Desire, but you can tell it was made at a more professional level, even if they were still mostly just stealing shots on the street without permits. The mannequin scene at the end, while cool, goes on way too long, it gets a little goofy, and ends up costing the movie both financially and emotionally. Number 11, Lolita. I honestly would consider every film from here on up to be influential and just an exceptional film. I feel like I just had to say that because it feels wrong putting some of these films so low on the list, but they gotta be put in order somehow. Lolita is a great dark satire that makes you squirm, makes you laugh. It introduced me to the magic of Peter Sellers, but more on that later. Goes on a little too long, but it's amplified by great performances. Shelley Winters was a huge highlight for me, playing the inept mother, but bringing so much heart and pathos to the role. And the film is a very cohesive story, displaying the downfall of Humbert Humbert. He starts as this stoic-looking leading man and ends as this pathetic, whiny baby. I don't know, this one's kind of hard to talk about, but it's still a good movie.
What was the decisive factor? My garden?
I think it was your charity prize.
Oh.
Number 10, The Killing. This one may move higher up in rewatches. If I could get over the absolutely nonsensical timeline and narration, I think this one holds a lot more value. It has some great characters, some really snappy dialogue for the time.
The way you put it down, could you make it sound real simple, Pops?
$5,000 for rubbing out a horse.
Okay, Pops, how do I get it?
The plot built nicely leading up to the heist, but the bouncing around of the timeline can't seem to get out of its own way enough to let me get fully invested. You can see that Kubrick is becoming more confident as a filmmaker here, though. There's more composed moves and holds, not as erratic as Killer's Kiss. It also has a really solid ending, and it obviously inspired films like Pulp Fiction, Ocean's 11. But as it is right now, the structure kind of tanks this one enough to make it lower in the rankings. Number 9, Paths of Glory. This is Kubrick's next film after making The Killing. I struggle putting this one as low as it is because it is a very powerful film that is so genuine in its approach. I liked the overarching view of war that this film took, starting with the generals arguing over which soldiers to send in, going down into the trenches with the soldiers and then back up to the bureaucratic level. Really gave a full perspective of the war. The trench shots are absolutely amazing. A super sad journey for some of the characters too. It just doesn't have the hook or the panache as some of the others, and obviously it's not supposed to. A little too much anthill talk. It's a great war movie with beautiful filmmaking and poignant messaging. But if I'm popping on a Kubrick movie, I'm going to be watching Kubrick's other anti-war movies over this one. Number 8, Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. This is the Kubrick film I need to rewatch the most. This film has great improv and huge comedic triumphs. Peter Sellers absolutely crushes it in all 3 roles he has. Sterling Hayden as the psychopathic Jack D. Ripper was another big highlight. It was nice to see him return to work with Kubrick after The Killing. I think he has a cool screen presence that I don't get from a lot of other actors I see in that time. It clearly inspired a lot of modern comedy and satire. I especially got some Mel Brooks vibes when I was watching. The film on first watch was just a little too dry and kind of boring, but I think Kubrick intended it to be that way. The smooth, methodical nature of the soldiers operating in perfect communication, performing heroic feats, calculations, it contrasts perfectly the absolute bumbling, repetitive, unfocused idiots in the war room. It's a very smart film with a lot of spirit, and maybe I'll find more entertainment spread throughout the entirety of the film on other rewatches, rather than just bursts of greatness with kind of dragging in between. It could be higher on my list in the future, but the first watch just didn't grab me like I wanted it to. But Slim Pickens riding a nuke will forever be a perfect image. Number 7, A Clockwork Orange. This one's kind of tough for me. This is probably Kubrick's darkest movie overall. It has great world building, it's very direct in its messaging, yet it's surreal as shit. Kubrick's got style, man. The sped up rear projection is one of my favorite touches, but there's so many things here that make this film stand out as something totally unique and important. The set design truly shines. Kubrick clearly didn't want to take a step down after making 2001. It's swanky and bizarre. It kind of sits side by side Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory in a fun way. Otherworldly yet 70s grunge set design. Has an enigmatic leader who uses a cane. Also came out in 71. I think it's just like kind of a fun companion piece now for me. Maybe a little too much narration in the movie, but it does feel pretty justified to the main character's madness. And the surrealism ultimately holds it back from making it into my upper ranks, but I think those are all kind of personal grievances, so this film can and does probably hold a lot more meaning to some others. The ultra-violence and sexualization is central to the movie, but it can be off-putting, so it's not really one I find myself wanting to rewatch either, but A Clockwork Orange simply can't be overlooked in Kubrick's filmography. Number 6, Eyes Wide Shut. This movie is so inviting. A movie dripping with eroticism. Every look, every innuendo, every building moment is there to push this theme of sex and relationships, and I was on board for the whole film.
Fuck.
One of the only Kubrick films to not use narration. At first, I was taken out a bit by Cruise and Kidman's acting, but they found their footing, and I found myself getting completely immersed in the winding story that this film travels down. A little more drawn out and vibey than some of Kubrick's other films. I have a sneaking suspicion that this film may also move up my list in the future, but that would mean that something else has to move down, and I'm not really sure which one I would move down. It also serves as a perfect end for Kubrick's mysterious persona and career. Themes dealing with starting to notice the grand picture, tracing it back to the true evil within society. It's a great cap on the filmmaker's career. Number 5, Barry Lyndon. This is an awesome, twisted tale with great acting, great characters, great set pieces, and great dialogue too. Very 18th century and stilted, but very rich in its back and forth. It doesn't feel like fodder like some other period pieces. And I'm going to be measuring most other period pieces up to this movie, and it's going to be hard for them to live up. It also utilizes a structure that some of the most influential filmmakers like Scorsese have used for years. The super fun rise and then the justified fall. The movie does a good job of never getting boring either. Each story chunk brings new characters, new dynamics, and sometimes they overlap and shift. I also really liked Ryan O'Neal's soft, almost dead inside performance as Barry. He's a very simple man, but very calculating, very logical. It's honestly one of the more engaging Kubrick films, strangely. You wouldn't think so, but it is. Number 4, Full Metal Jacket. I think this is the most buzzy of Kubrick's films. Seems like it might be the one that permeated culture the most.
Well, baby, me so horny. Me so horny. Me love you long time.
Arlie Ermy is one of the best pieces of casting I think ever, and Vincent D'Onofrio obviously has the huge standout performance in the film. It's one of Kubrick's funnier films, at least in the first half. Then it becomes this twisted, dark journey into the psyche of man and the wrestling of humanity in this inhumane time and place. The Vietnam War setting makes this film feel like it might be the most like un-Kubrick, or the one that you might have already felt like you've seen before. But it's still one of the best war movies I've ever seen. Kubrick still has his hands on it and makes it feel unique. It feels like a feast of visuals, characters, and a twisted journey into war told on Kubrick's terms. Number 3, Spartacus. This is probably the one that would have most people scratching their heads. Kubrick disowned this film from his catalog, but I honestly can't understand why. I haven't seen all of the epics out there, but this is definitely the best I've ever seen. It's packed with intrigue and conflict, and it's not just one note throughout the whole film. There's really good buildup placed on both sides of the conflict, both leading to each other's downfall. 3 hours long, but I honestly found it to be pretty evenly paced. Got a nice intermission in there. And afterward, I couldn't really decide on any part or element I would have taken out of the story to make it better. I kind of needed the whole 3-hour epicness. A lot of people think Kirk Douglas is miscast or kind of goofy in the role, and I can kind of understand those gripes, but I actually found him to be pretty powerful on screen, and I also found the Spartacus character to be one of the most well-rounded and compelling hero characters I've seen in a long time. Even if this was more of a studio film for Kubrick or he had beef behind the scenes, it doesn't negate the fact that he created an epic spectacle that exploded when it was released in 1960. I would have loved to have been in the theater when this came out. Number 2, 2001, A Space Odyssey. My theory is that everyone has a different ranking when it comes to Kubrick. His films especially are going to hit people differently. But 2001 was an experimental masterpiece. This was the first time I had seen it, so it was a long time coming for me. It's not perfect in its structure, and that's honestly the only major gripe that most people would find with the movie. But when you zoom out and see the whole scope of what Kubrick is saying, the structure makes sense and it feels right. And the pace is something that you definitely have to get on board for. It does not have the modern pace that most people are used to. It's deliberate, it takes its sweet time, and if you can get on its wavelength, it will have you captivated the entire time. It did for me. The sets, the music, the atmosphere, it's just amazing. And the directing is top notch. I was worried going in that this movie wouldn't live up to the hype, but god damn it, it does in my opinion.
Dave, my mind is going. I can feel it. I can feel it.
And number 1, The Shining. I did not think this would be my number 1 at the start of doing this. This is definitely one of Kubrick's most entertaining films, though. It's an easier watch than some of his other movies, too. He might have just cracked something special when it came to horror, or his sensibilities just mixed perfectly with it. Obviously, there's fantastic performances from Jack Nicholson and Shelley Duvall. The movie is thematically tight and very well executed. It deviates from Stephen King's source, but I think Kubrick really nailed his vision of the story. Jack Nicholson is a dick from the beginning, which makes his push feel more inevitable rather than just a good man turned evil. And it's a little more socially relevant this way, with the theme of abuse or abusive relationships at the forefront over just straight horror or just kind of like spooky ghost stuff. The music is great. The tone ratchets up along with the tension. And I love the idea of ending frozen in the middle of a maze as a metaphor for insanity. This is the one, if I had to recommend one film for a newcomer to Kubrick, I think I'd recommend this one to get them easily hooked. Then they can go back and kind of get into his more niche stuff. I'm so glad that I took this odyssey through Kubrick's films. I always had an image of what a Kubrick movie is going to feel like, kind of cold and disconnected. And yet every time, it was more jovial and accessible than what I was envisioning. I'll be rewatching his films for the rest of my life. He was a genius filmmaker, and his influence on cinema is insane. His precision over his vision is something that is truly inspiring and gives his films a rare air. And really overall, if he proved anything to me as a filmmaker, it's to not be afraid of zoom shots, baby. Yeah! Zoom shots. Zoom shots. Zoom shots. Zoom, zoom. Zoom, zoom, zoom shots. Zoom shots. Zoom, zoom. They're pretty cool.